The majority of the ships for the assault of Tinian were loaded at Tanapag Harbor on Saipan by troops of the Saipan Island Command. 10 preloaded tank landing ships, LSDs, with 3.5 days' supply of water, rations, medical supplies, and ammunition on their top decks, were allocated to each division and 8 to the NTLF. 76 14 pontoon barges were loaded with drums of fuel and towed to positions off the reef to supply fuel to amphibious vehicles and landing craft. 77. After the initial landing, loaded trucks and trailers were embarked on landing craft, which shuttled them to Tinian, where they unloaded at dumps and then returned on landing craft. 20 landing craft mechanized LCMs, 10 landing craft tank LCTs, and 8 LSDs were assigned to this role, along with 88 2.5-ton 6x6 trucks and 25 trailers. 77. Marine divisions each had 2 battalions of 75 MPAC howitzers and 2 of 105 howitzers. The latter remained behind on Saipan, but the 4th Marine Division was given the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 10th Marines, so it had 4 battalions of 75 MPAC howitzers. 2 amphibious truck duck companies were assigned to move them ashore quickly, 76-78. Each battalion was carried in an LSD. 76 tanks were loaded onto LCMs. 18 of the LCMs, each carrying 1 tank, were each embarked on the dock landing ships LSDs, USS Ashland and Belle Grove. 77. Another 10 tank-carrying LCMs sailed to Tinian under their own power. 79. Landing on Tinian. The Marines left their packs behind on Saipan and landed with coveralls, M1 helmets with camouflage covers, weapons, emergency rations, a spoon, a spare pair of socks, a poncho, and insect repellent. 76-80. The assault troops were carried ashore in the 415 amphibious tractors, LVTs of the Marine Corps' 2nd, 5th, and 10th Amphibian Tractor Battalions, and the Army's 534th, 715th, and 773rd Amphibian Tractor Battalions. Fire support was provided by the Company D of the 2nd Armored Amphibian Battalion. Only one company could be employed due to the narrowness of the beaches. 81. The shore party for White Beach 1 was provided by the Army's 1,341st Engineer Combat Battalion, and that of White Beach 2 by the 2nd Battalion, 20th Marines. 79. Captain Paul J. Halloran, the NTLF construction officer, designed a landing ramp that could be carried by an LVT. This creation was named a doodlebug. The doodlebugs allowed vehicles to scale the low cliffs around the white beaches. The doodlebug drove up to the cliff face, firmly attached hooks to the cliff tops, and then backed away from under the ramps, leaving them in place, with the other end falling into the water. The ramp crews checked that the ramps were firmly anchored, and then the doodlebugs drove over them to the top of the cliffs. The ramps were strong enough to hold the weight of a 35 short-ton, 32T medium tank. 10 were built, of which 6 were used in the assault, carried to Tinian by Ashland. 80-276. Demonstration of the doodlebug on Saipan. Cates assigned the 24th Marines to land on White Beach 1 battalion at a time, starting with the 2nd Battalion, while the 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 25th Marines landed on White Beach 2. The 23rd Marines was in reserve. 81. The first wave of LVTs, consisting of 8 LVTs for White Beach 1 and 16 for White Beach 2, left the line of departure at 07. 17 followed at close intervals by 14 more waves. 8 LVTs carried a rifle company of about 200 men. No more than 4 LVTs could beach at the one time on White Beach 1, so the other 4 nosed up against the 3 to 10 foot, 1 to 3 m coral cliffs, and the Marines clambered over them. Company E of the 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines, was first ashore there. It was opposed by a small number of Japanese defenders in crevices and a cave, who were eliminated after a brief action, allowing the rest of the 2nd Battalion and the shore party of the 1,341st Engineer Battalion to land unopposed. 8384. Two pillboxes guarded White Beach 2, which were bypassed by the first waves but reduced by later ones. 50 dead Japanese were found inside. Both beaches had mines. None exploded on White Beach 1, where they had been allowed to deteriorate, but the area around White Beach 2 was sown with anti-boat mines on the beach and anti-personnel mines ashore, which the Underwater Demolition Teams, UDTs, bomb disposal teams and engineers took until 13:37 to clear. 3 LVTs were disabled by mines when they ventured inland from White Beach 2, 8384. The 4th Tank Battalion had trouble negotiating the reefs, potholes, and mines on White Beach 2 and was diverted to White Beach 1. Despite its small size, nearly all vehicles were landed over White Beach 1. This included the M3 Stuart light tanks of Company D with Ronson flamethrowers. In the afternoon, Company A came ashore on White Beach 2 without mishap, 85. All 3 assault battalions were ashore by 08:20. On White Beach 1, the 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines, was followed by the 1st Battalion, which was ashore by 08:46, and the 3rd Battalion at 09:25. On White Beach 2, the Reserve Battalion, the 1st Battalion, 25th Marines, was ashore by 09:30. Ducks carrying the artillery began landing at 13:15, the 23rd Marines at 14:00, and the 2nd Marine Division's 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, at 17:00. The planned beachhead was occupied, and the Marines strung barbed wire and established fields of fire in anticipation of a Japanese counterattack. 2 pontoon causeway piers were placed during the night, allowing loaded trucks to come ashore from LSDs. By the evening, 15,614 Marines, soldiers and sailors had landed on Tinian, at a cost of 15 men killed and 225 wounded, 8684. Counterattack. Agata immediately attempted to organize a counterattack, in keeping with Japanese doctrine at the time of repulsing the attack on the beach. The 1st Battalion, 50th Infantry Regiment, was already in the vicinity of the American beachhead and was able to probe the hastily positioned defenses for weaknesses. The 2nd Battalion in the Isiga Bay area was not far away, but could not move until dark, when American aircraft were not in the sky. Izumi's mobile counterattack force was ordered forward from its assembly position in the Mappo area. He moved along the side of the roads, where trees offered concealment from the air, and was only spotted from the air once. Agata kept the 3rd Battalion in place at Tinian Town in case the Americans made a follow-up landing there. Naval troops approached the beachhead from the Ushi Point airfield, 87. Marines inspect a knocked-out Japanese tank. At around 02:00 on 25 July, a force of about 600 Japanese sailors encountered the 1st Battalion, 24th Marines, on the left of the American beachhead, and charged into machine gun, mortar, rifle, and 37 anti-tank gun canister shot fire. A furious fight ensued, in which Company A was reduced to just 30 men, but by 07:00 476 Japanese lay dead. 88-89. In the center of the American line, another attack developed at the boundary between the 24th and 25th Marines. About 200 Japanese soldiers broke through the lines of Company K, 25th Marines, and divided into 2 groups. One group attacked Battery D, 14th Marines. The attack was halted with the help of Browning .50 caliber machine gun fire from Batteries E and F. Company C of the 8th Marines was sent to their aid, but found the situation in hand. About 100 dead Japanese were found in the area. 2 men of Battery D were killed. The other group was engaged in a wooded area by 60 mortars. The attack in the center cost the Japanese about 500 dead, most of whom were from the 1st Battalion, 135th Infantry Regiment. Many were caught on the barbed wire and killed by machine gun fire, 88-90. On the right, the 23rd Marines were attacked by 5 or 6 Japanese tanks, accompanied by infantry of the 1st and 2nd Battalions, 50th Infantry Regiment, and the 1st Battalion, 135th Infantry Regiment. The moonless night was lit up by Navy star shells. 5 Japanese tanks were knocked out by bazookas, 75 half-tracks and 37 anti-tank guns. The Japanese infantry charged the lines of the 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines and 2nd Battalion, 25th Marines. Some broke through their lines, only to encounter the 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines. In the morning, 267 Japanese dead were counted in this sector. In all, the counterattack cost Agata about 1,200 dead, 8891. Drive south. M4 Sherman tanks and other vehicles deploy inland. Extended exhaust stacks allow them to operate in shallow water. The nighttime actions had depleted the 4th Marine Division's ammunition, so Cates delayed attacking on 25 July until 10:00 to allow time to replenish. In the meantime, the rest of the 2nd Marine Division began landing. 92. As they moved north along the coast through terrain characterized by coral rocks and thick undergrowth, the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, was held up by a force of 20 to 25 Japanese that it took until 11:30 to overcome. On their right, the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, reached the Ushi Point airfield, and the 24th Marines reached airfield number 3, 9394. The 25th Marines was confronted by the most formidable obstacle of the day, Mount Maga, which was captured with a double envelopment, 9395. The following day, the 25th Marines captured the steeper and more imposing Mount Lasso without opposition, as the Japanese had pulled out during the night. The advance had now begun to outrun the range of the artillery on Saipan, so the 105 howitzer battalions of the 10th and 14th Marines displaced to Tinian on 26 and 27 July and rejoined their divisions, 9695. The Marines pressed forward on 27 and 28 July against sporadic Japanese resistance, 97. Weather breaks. USS LSD-340 at the pontoon pier on White Beach 2. The weather abruptly worsened on the afternoon of 28 July, 98. A typhoon in the Philippine Sea caused heavy swells, 97. At 18:00 all unloading ceased. USS LSD-340 ran aground on the reef, and efforts to refloat her were unsuccessful. On 13 August, she was pulled off the reef and towed to Tanapag Harbor, where she was beached. A control craft, LCC-25473, was washed up on the reef at White Beach 1, but was salvaged the following day. The pontoon causeways were damaged on the night of 29 July. The one at White Beach 1 broached and the one at White Beach 2 broke in two. The White Beach 1 causeway was restored to service on 31 July, only to broach again, 99-100. With the Ushi Point airfield in American hands, the 121st Naval Construction Battalion commenced its repair on 27 July, filling in the bomb and shell craters. By that evening, an airstrip 2,500 feet, 760 m long and 150 feet, 46 m wide was ready for use, and it was fully restored to its 4,700 foot, 1,400 m length the next day, 101. On 29 July, a P-47 landed and took off again. 102. Hill summoned the 9th Troop Carrier Squadron from Eniwetok and its Douglas C-47 Skytrains. Together with the Curtiss C-46 Commandos of VMR 252, delivered 33,000 rations from Saipan on 31 July. On the return trip they carried wounded. A parachute drop of 30 short tons, 27 t of supplies was prepared, but was not necessary. 103-100. Marines move across the wreckage of the Japanese airfield at Ushi Point. The rough seas precluded unloading to all but Duckwas. 97. These were the preferred transport for supplies, as they did not damage the roads like the LVTs did. In some places, engineers constructed parallel roads for LVTs. 76. One important task for the Ducks was hauling ammunition from the ammunition ships SS Rockland Victory, which arrived off Tinian on 26 July, and MSC Witch, which arrived the following day. The ducks also had to haul 600 to 800 drums of fuel each day from the floating barges. A gasoline shortage was averted by the capture of Japanese stocks, 104. On 30 July, the 24th Marines occupied Tinian town, and the 25th Marines overran Airfield No. 4. 105. The land mines were cleared away, and LCTs began landing on Green Beach. The water off the South Pier was not deep enough to allow LSDs to dock there, so pontoon causeways were brought from White Beach 1 and Saipan, allowing the first LSD to dock on 4 August. The beach between the two piers was cleared of landmines by 5 August and was resurfaced with coral, allowing up to 15 LCMs to beach there simultaneously. The harbor had not been mined, but there were sunken wrecks, which the UDTs demolished. 106. Tinian taken. A 75 MPAC howitzer, nicknamed Miss Connie, is fired into a Japanese-held cave on Tinian. The gun was locked securely in this unusual position after the parts were hand-carried to the cliff's edge. Japanese remnants made a final stand in the caves and ravines of a limestone ridge on the south portion of the island, 107, where the terrain rose in a brush and rock-strewn plateau 5,000 yards, 4,600 m, long and 2,000 yards, 1,800 m, wide. On the evening of 30 July, Schmidt ordered his divisions to occupy the coastline between Lalo and Mapo points and annihilate the remaining Japanese forces. 108. The next morning, the battleships Tennessee and California and the cruisers Louisville, Montpelier and Birmingham unleashed 615 short tons, 558 t of shells on the plateau. An aircraft dropped 69 short tons, 63 t of bombs, 109-110. As they advanced, the Marines encountered civilians waving white cloths who had to be approached with care, as sometimes one of their number turned out to be a Japanese soldier intent on suicide and taking some Americans with him. 111. Kakuta sent his last radio message to Tokyo that day. It is not known whether he was killed in action or committed suicide. 112. Neither his body nor that of Oi was ever found. 113. The rugged terrain hampered the tanks, but the flamethrower tanks of Company D, 4th Tank Battalion, were adept at burning sections of undergrowth where Japanese soldiers tried to hide. 109. As the 23rd Marines approached the plateau, they came under intense small arms fire from a small village in the cliff face. The accompanying tanks of Company C, 4th Tank Battalion, were engaged by a concealed Japanese 47 anti-tank gun, which scored 6 hits on one tank. Although penetrated, the tank remained operational and was able to back away. It used smoke to mark the suspected location of the gun for rockets and naval and tank gunfire. The advance resumed, only to have another tank hit by the same gun. Although also penetrated, it too remained operational, and this time the target was spotted and engaged by tanks that destroyed the gun and machine-gunned 20 Japanese crewmen who tried to escape. 114-115. Marines cautiously probe a cave on 28 July. Meanwhile, the 8th Marines made their way onto the plateau, where vegetation covered caves and fissures where Japanese riflemen and machine gunners lurked. While the vegetation concealed them from observation by the Americans, it also restricted their own fields of view. There was one winding road to the top, but it was mined. Engineers removed the mines, allowing tanks to proceed up the road and destroy Japanese positions, while the accompanying infantry battled their way through the brush. At 16:50, Company A reached the top. 5 minutes later, they were joined by a platoon from Company C. Company E, following up the road, was attacked by between 75 and 100 Japanese who were eventually repelled. It then made its way to the top. Company G followed, reaching the top at 18:45, which was sunset. During the night, the Japanese attempted to cut off the Americans on the summit. They captured some vehicles but were unsuccessful. At 05:50, 15, the Marines' positions were attacked by more than 600 Japanese soldiers and sailors. An hour later, the 8th Marines had 74 casualties and 200 Japanese were dead. The rest withdrew to the woods and cliffs in the southwest of the island. 116-117. Lolo Point, the southernmost tip of the island, was reached at 18:00 on 1 August, and 55 minutes later, Schmidt declared that organized resistance had ended, and the island was secure. 118. Nonetheless, that night, the 6th Marines were attacked by a poorly coordinated force of about 150 Japanese soldiers and sailors. According to Japanese prisoners, Agata had burned the regimental colors and gathered as many men as he could for a counterattack. The following morning, 124 Japanese dead were counted, many of whom had died by their own hand, but Agata's body was never identified. 119-120. Casualties. As a Navy corpsman administers a bottle of plasma to a wounded Marine, the stretcher bearers wait patiently to carry him on board a landing craft which will evacuate him to a hospital ship offshore, where he will be given full treatment. In his report on the Tinian operation, Turner reported the 2nd Marine Division's losses in the period from 24 July to 9 August as 104 killed, 654 wounded and 3 missing, a total of 761. The 4th Marine Division lost 182 killed, 844 wounded and 20 missing, a total of 1,046. 4 men of the XXIV Corps Artillery were wounded, and there were 4 killed, 13 wounded and 1 missing among the V Amphibious Corps troops, for a total of 290 killed, 1,515 wounded and 24 missing, giving a grand total of 1,829 casualties, 122. Another 63 sailors and Marines were killed, and 177 wounded aboard ships, 123-74. The dead included 2 men who were posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for using their bodies to protect their comrades from hand grenades. Private Joseph W. Osborne and Private First Class Robert L. Wilson, 124. By 10 August, Japanese casualties included 404 taken prisoner and 5,745 dead that were buried by the Americans, 121. Analysis. Smith considered Tinian the perfect amphibious operation in the Pacific War. 125. It differed from most in that the proximity of Saipan allowed it to be carried out as a short-ashore operation rather than a ship-to-shore one, and fire support was available from land-based artillery. 126. The operation was much less difficult than Saipan. The nearest base was just 5 miles 8 km away, not over 1,000. The garrison was smaller. The ratio of attackers to defenders was greater. The terrain was less formidable. Intelligence was more accurate, and the preliminary naval and aerial bombardment more protracted. 127. Marines stacked mortar rounds in preparation for firing a fast barrage on 30 July. The Battle of Tinian offered a rare example of a force that expected to be attacked still being taken by surprise. 128. Our singular success at Tinian, Smith later wrote, lay in the boldness of the landing. 129. The Americans had accurate intelligence, assembled from multiple sources, and knew that the Japanese would not be waiting for them on the white beaches. Aerial photography of Saipan was restricted through fear that the Japanese would be alerted and the element of surprise would be lost, whereas aerial photography of Tinian was unrestricted but surprise was not sacrificed. 130. American commanders gambled on good weather, but when the weather eventually broke, the American logistical system still held. Ducks were still able to operate when landing craft could not, and Hill recommended that ducks replace LCVPs on the Navy's attack cargo ships. Additional supply capability was available by air, although it was not needed. 126. For their part, the Japanese incurred high casualties in fruitless counterattacks that were defeated by American firepower. They managed to move undetected at night and were able to withdraw from contact with little loss whenever they wished to do so. Heavier American casualties might have been inflicted by a passive defense, taking advantage of their skill with camouflage, use of terrain, and emplacement of weapons, but this was not Japanese doctrine at the time. 131. Aftermath. Mopping up. Marines bathe a Tinian girl after she and her family had been removed from a hillside dugout. On 6 August, Brigadier General Merritt A. Edson, the deputy commander of the 2nd Marine Division, assumed tactical responsibility as commander of Ground Forces Tinian. The 8th Marines assumed responsibility for the whole 2nd Marine Division sector 2 days later, allowing the rest of the division to return to Saipan for rest and reorganization. On 10 August, it took over the 4th Marine Division sector as well, so it could return to Hawaii. 132 Major General James L. Underhill was appointed island commander on 1 August 1944. 9 days later, all forces on Tinian were transferred to his command. 134. He was succeeded by Brigadier General Frederick V. H. Kimball on 28 November. 135. The 8th Marines patrolled the island, mopping up Japanese holdouts. On 25 October, the 8th Marines joined the rest of the 2nd Marine Division on Saipan, leaving the 1st Battalion behind on Tinian. It continued mopping up patrols until 1 January 1945, when it too departed for Saipan. Between 1 August 1944 and 1 January 1945, the 8th Marines lost another 38 killed and 125 wounded. 542 Japanese soldiers were killed. 136 responsibility for the defense of Tinian was handed over to the Marines of the 16th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion. 137. It departed for Okinawa in April 1945, but the 17th and 18th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalions remained to defend the airbases. 138. The garrison on Aguiguan Island off the southwest Cape of Tinian, commanded by 2nd Lieutenant Kenichi Yamada, held out until the end of the war, surrendering to Rear Admiral Marshal R. Greer on the United States Coast Guard cutter USCG-80 3525 on 4 September 1945. The entire garrison of 67 troops, along with 172 Japanese and 128 Korean civilians, were interned on Tinian. 139-140, the last holdout on Tinian, Murata Suzumu, was captured in 1953 and repatriated to Japan. 141-142. Military government. There were 16,029 civilians on Tinian on 15 April 1944, of whom 1,658, mostly women, children, and the elderly, were evacuated to Japan before the American invasion. 143-144, an estimated 2,610 civilians died in the battle. 145. Journalist Robert Sherrod noted that most died as a result of the fighting. The Americans made great use of artillery, aerial and naval bombardment, and civilians often sheltered with soldiers. Some died from disease, dehydration, or malnutrition. 146. Some were murdered by Japanese soldiers. 147. In one instance, Japanese soldiers tied 40 to 50 civilians together and threw a grenade at them. 148. There were instances of mass suicide, most notably by jumping off the 120-foot, 37 suicide cliff between Mappo and Lalo points. 149 children were thrown off the cliff by their parents, and some civilians were pushed off the cliff by Japanese soldiers. 119. A captured Japanese soldier claimed that 1,000 loyal citizens had allowed the military to blow them up in caves. 150. Staff Sergeant Federico Claveria gives candy to an interned child. 151. Only 2,468 civilians had been accounted for by 1 August, but within 3 days that number had increased to 8,491, 133. The 2nd Marine Division established a stockade for civilians at the Ushi Point airfield, while the 4th Marine Division established one on the site of the ruined village of Churo. The latter was chosen as a permanent campsite, and all the civilians were subsequently concentrated there. 152. By 15 October, there were 10,926 civilians at Camp Churo, of whom 8,625 were Japanese, 2,297 were Koreans, and 4 were Chinese. Nearly half were children under the age of 15, 144. The military government was unprepared to care for the large number of civilians, and there were critical shortages of relief supplies of all kinds. 153 Seabees supervised the erection of tarpaulin shelters. These were gradually replaced by huts made from corrugated iron and timber salvaged from around the island. The internees also salvaged food supplies and cultivated gardens. When firewood started to become scarce, Seabees made them improvised diesel stoves. 154. In late 1945, Spruance, who had succeeded Nimitz as CINCPOA, ordered the repatriation of all Japanese and Korean civilians. This was completed by late 1946, 155. Base development. Main article, Tinian Naval Base. A CB waves at incoming Boeing B-29 Superfortress bombers. Responsibility for the transformation of Tinian into a base for B-29 bombers was assigned to the 6th Naval Construction Brigade, under Halloran's command. For this work, his brigade had the 29th and 30th Naval Construction Regiments. A 3rd regiment, the 49th Naval Construction Regiment, arrived in March 1945. 156. 2 air bases were constructed, North Field and West Field. These were on the site of the existing Japanese fields at Ushi Point and Gurguin Point respectively, but they had to be lengthened to 8,500 feet, 2,600 m, and widened to 500 feet, 150 m, to handle the B-29s. This task would have been easier if the plateau had been more than 7,000 feet, 2,100 m wide. As it was, large amounts of fill were required. 157. When work was completed on 5 May 1945, North Field had 4 parallel 8,500-foot, 2,600 m runways, with 8 miles, 13 km of taxiways, 265 hardstands, 173 Quonset huts, and 92 other buildings. Its construction involved 2,109,800 cubic yards, 1,613,100 m3, of excavations, and 4,789,400 cubic yards, 3,661,800 m3, of fill. Westfield had 2 B-29 runways, 53,000 feet, 16,000 m, of taxiways, 220 hardstands, and 251 administration, maintenance, and repair buildings. The adjacent base for naval aircraft had 16,000 feet, 4,900 m of taxiways, 70 hardstands, 345 Quonset huts, 33 administration, maintenance, and repair buildings, and a 75-foot, 23 m tall control tower. 157. Tinian in 1945, after airbase construction was complete. North Field is in the foreground and West Field in the background. Initially, fuel had to be supplied in drums. Later, aviation gasoline was drawn from a barge anchored in Tinian Harbor. The fuel storage and distribution system was completed by 8 March 1945. This included storage tanks for 14,000 U.S. barrels, 1,700,000 L, of diesel oil, 20,000 U.S. barrels, 2,400,000 L, of motor gasoline and 165,000 U.S. barrels, 19,700,000 L, of aviation gasoline. Fuel was pumped over a submarine pipeline from an oil tanker moored north of Tinian Harbor and distributed over 86,000 feet, 26,000 m of pipeline. 158. Work on the harbor included dredging operations and the construction of a breakwater and quays for Liberty ships. Until it was completed in March 1945, cargo was brought ashore by LCMs and LCTs. 159. Northfield became operational in February 1945 and Westfield the following month. 160. The 313th Bombardment Wing arrived from the United States in December 1944 and was based at Northfield. The 58th Bombardment Wing arrived from the China-Burma India Theater in March 1945 and was based at Westfield. A third formation, the 509th Composite Group, arrived in May 1945 and moved to Northfield, where it took over an area that had been specially constructed for it. Thus, 2 of the 5 bombardment wings of the 20th Air Force were based on Tinian, 161-162. These formations participated in the campaign of air raids on Japan, including the bombing of Tokyo on 10 March 1945, 163, and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on 6 and 9 August 1945.